Welcome back to the deep dive. We have a really serious one for you today.
Yeah, it's definitely not light reading.
No, it is not. But before we even touch the surface of this topic, and trust me, you are going to want to hear every minute of this, do us a huge favor. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed to the show. It really helps us get this out there.
Absolutely.
Now, today we are tackling a source that is less of a book and more of like a flamethrower taken to modern cultural narratives.
It certainly isn't interested in being polite. We are diving into an ebook with a title that tells you exactly what you're in for. It's called Leftist Insanity, Purity Spirals, Narcissism of Small Differences, and Rejection of Reality by Conrad Riker.
That is quite a mouthful.
It really is, but it covers a massive amount of ground.
Right, and this is what you might call an ultra-long, highly incisive look into the state of Western civilization. Riker's core premise is pretty stark. He argues that civilization is actively crumbling because we've essentially rejected biological reality in favor of what he terms leftist lunacy and gynocentric control.
Right, and it's really important to frame who this book is actually written for right off the bat.
Yeah, who is the target audience here?
Riker makes it very clear in his preface. This is a manual written specifically for the red-pilled man, for men's rights activists, and really for anyone who feels completely betrayed by modern institutions.
So he's not holding back.
Not at all. He explicitly says he's not offering comforting fairy tales here. He calls this an arsenal of facts.
An arsenal of facts. Okay, so if you are looking to understand the history of our institutions before they were captured, I'm talking about universities, HR departments, the media, this is a must-read.
It really breaks down that timeline of capture.
Exactly. And frankly, we are only going to scratch the surface of the content Riker packs into this text today. So if what we discuss resonates with you, you need to head over to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy the copy.
Yeah, there's a mountain of history and data we just won't have time to cover.
Right. But let's unpack the diagnosis first. Riker starts with this concept of purity spirals. That's a term we hear thrown around a lot lately, but how does he define it?
It's a fascinating, if disturbing, sociological concept. According to Riker, a purity spiral occurs when a social or political movement devolves into a sort of hysterical mob.
So it loses its original purpose.
Exactly. The goal of the movement stops being about the original cause, say, equality or justice, and becomes a competition. It's a race to see who is the most virtuous or the most woke.
And what happens to the people inside that movement?
Well, Riker argues that in these spirals, allies will essentially eat their own just to prove they are purer than the person standing next to them. It is a race to the bottom of extremism.
He uses a really specific historical example to illustrate this, doesn't he?
He does.
The meltdown at Evergreen State College. That was back in 2017, right?
Yes, 2017. He goes into quite a bit of detail on this because he sees it as patient zero for this specific kind of modern spiral. For those who don't remember, Evergreen had a tradition called the Day of Absence.
What was the original purpose of that?
Historically, minority students and faculty would voluntarily leave campus for a day. It was to highlight their contributions, to show what the campus looks like without them. It was a statement on presence and value.
Okay, but in 2017, the script got flipped.
Completely flipped. Riker explains that the organizers decided that white people, students, and professors should be the ones asked to leave campus. They were essentially told to stay away.
And this is where the spiral kicks in.
Exactly. A biology professor named Brett Weinstein sent an email refusing to participate in this new version.
And his argument was pretty grounded, wasn't it? Like,
Right.
from a logical standpoint?
Yes. He argued that there's a massive difference between a group voluntarily absenting themselves to make a point and a group forcing another group to leave based purely on their race. He called it an act of oppression.
And because he refused to comply with the new dogma?
The mob turned on him instantly.
Riker describes the fallout of this as dissociative ceremonialism. That's a really heavy phrase. Break that down for us. Is he saying they literally dissociate from reality?
It's a psychological assessment of the crowd's behavior. Dissociative ceremonialism implies that the group enters a sort of trance where reality testing just vanishes. It stops being about debate or logic.
It becomes about the ritual.
Right, ritual humiliation. Riker describes students patrolling the campus with baseball bats, the administration standing down and actively refusing to enforce order.
And Weinstein is basically hunted on his own campus.
Yes, the ceremony is the destruction of the heretic. Riker points to this as a clear, undeniable sign of institutional capture, that academia has been taken over by ideologies that value this performative outrage over logic, safety, or free speech.
And he connects this behavior to another concept he calls the narcissism of small differences.
Right. This is crucial for understanding how these captured institutions function today. Riker argues that in these places, whether it's academia, media, or corporate HR minor disagreements, become grounds for total reputation destruction.
So you can't just mostly agree.
No. You can agree with 99% of the ideology, but if you hesitate on that last 1%, the narcissism of small differences kicks in. You are treated worse than a total outsider. You have to be 100% compliant, or you're the enemy.
Which leads right into how language itself gets weaponized to enforce that compliance. The book spends a significant amount of time discussing newspeak. I assume he's making the direct Orwell comparison there.
He is, but Riker applies it very specifically to modern gender politics and the control of men. He talked about terms like toxic masculinity.
Now, usually you hear that term used by the mainstream to describe things like violence or bullying.
Right, but Riker argues this term is actually being used as a tool to pathologize normal biological male behavior, things like competitiveness, stoicism, or aggression in defense of others.
So the argument is that by slapping the label toxic on it, you're treating fundamental biological traits as a sickness.
Exactly. It frames masculinity itself as a pathology that needs to be cured. And on the flip side of that linguistic control, he discusses the push for new pronouns and terms like birthing people or chest feeding.
I think a lot of people see those terms as just trying to be inclusive, but Riker sees a darker motive.
He argues it's much more calculated than just inclusion. Riker cites these terms as a deliberate attempt to erase biological categories entirely.
How does that work?
His point is that if you break the language used to describe biological reality, if you can no longer say mother or woman to mean a biological female, you literally break cognitive reasoning.
Because you don't have the words to describe what you're seeing.
Exactly. You make it impossible to discuss facts because the words themselves have been captured. It's a way to short-circuit any debate about biology before it even starts.
Wow, so that's the cultural diagnosis. The language, the mobs, the captured institutions. But Riker claims this isn't just random politics. He says it's a systematic ignoring of biological reality. And this is where the deep dive gets really interesting, because he leans heavily on evolutionary biology to explain the modern dating market.
He really goes in depth here. He brings up the concept of female hypergamy.
Hypergamy. Define that for us in this context.
In evolutionary terms, it's the drive for women to seek upgrades in partners. Riker argues that women are biologically hardwired to look for the best possible genetic or resource provisioning match, regardless of their own socioeconomic status.
And he brings the receipts with actual dating app data. I think a lot of guys listening have suspected this is how it works, but the numbers Riker quotes from the sources are pretty brutal. What are we looking at here?
He cites specific data derived from Tinder user patterns. According to Riker's source, women on the app rate about 80% of men as below average in attractiveness.
Wait, pause on that math for a second. In a normal distribution, average is the middle, so 50% should be below, 50% above.
Exactly. That's how a standard bell curve works. But Riker points out that female selection doesn't follow a bell curve at all. If 80% of men are viewed as below average or unworthy of attention, that means the vast majority of women are competing for just the top 20% of men.
The guys the book refers to as chads.
Yes, which leaves the vast majority of men trapped in what Riker calls a loneliness economy.
A loneliness economy. That's a powerful phrase.
It is. The argument is that the sexual marketplace is completely unregulated and hyper-capitalist, and most men are essentially priced out of the market because of this hypergamous filter.
But, and here's the kicker, while this ruthless selection is happening in the dating market, Riker argues there is a massive gaslighting operation happening in the economic market, specifically regarding the wage gap.
Oh yes, he goes after the wage gap hard.
The 77 cents on the dollar talking point, we hear that constantly from politicians and the media. Riker tears this apart.
He calls it a complete and utter fraud. He points to Department of Labor data showing that when you account for the actual variables,
Things like what?
things like hours worked, job choices, dangerous working conditions, and risk tolerance, the gap completely disappears. In fact, he cites a specific statistic from the data that childless women under 35 actually out-earn men in numerous U.S. cities.
They out-earn men.
Yes, largely because they are attending college at significantly higher rates.
So if the data clearly shows the gap is a myth, why does the narrative persist so stubbornly? Riker says it's because of gynocentrism.
This is a core theme that runs through the entire book. Gynocentrism is the idea that society prioritizes female emotional comfort over male reality.
Okay, explain how that plays out.
Riker argues that we have institutionalized a specifically female form of aggression. He calls it reputation carpet bombing.
Reputation carpet bombing, that is a vivid image. What does that look like in practice?
Well, men traditionally compete through direct confrontation or competence hierarchies. Who is the strongest, who is the smartest, who can build the bridge. But Riker argues women are biologically wired for social destruction gossip, ruining reputations, social ostracization.
And the institutions have adopted this.
That's his claim. He says that HR departments and universities have essentially become weaponized systems for this exact type of female-centric warfare. It allows for the total destruction of a man's livelihood without him ever facing his accuser in a fair, direct fight.
It's a very heavy perspective, but it perfectly sets the stage for where he takes us next, which is the legal battlefield. If society is gynocentric, the courts are where the hammer actually drops. Riker calls it the divorce industrial complex.
He has an incredibly grim view of marriage and family law today. He argues that modern marriage is essentially a contract where the terms can be changed by one party at any time, with the state enforcing devastating penalties on the other party.
And the statistics he throws out are staggering.
They are. The sources in the book point out that women initiate 70 to 80% of all divorces.
That's a massive majority. And what happens to the men once they are forced into the system?
According to the data he cites, women receive alimony and custody in the vast majority of cases. He mentions figures hovering around 90 to 97% in certain jurisdictions or historical contexts.
Wow.
Riker describes men trapped in this system as being treated as nothing more than ATMs with pulses.
There are some really gut-wrenching anecdotes in the book regarding this. He talks about paternity fraud. Men paying for kids that DNA proves aren't even theirs.
That's a specific point he hammers home to show the system's bias. Riker argues the family court system is so obsessed with the stability of the child, which usually just translates to maintaining the mother's household income, that actual truth doesn't matter.
So the biology doesn't matter there either.
Right. He describes cases where DNA conclusively proves the man isn't the biological father, but the court orders him to pay child support anyway simply because he acted as the father previously.
He describes men living in their cars while their ex-wives vacation on their dime.
It's presented as a massive, systemic transfer of wealth from men to women, enforced by the threat of state violence.
And it's not just about money, is it? It's about weaponized victimhood. We have to talk about the false accusation section of the book. This is a huge, looming fear for many men today.
Riker is highly critical of the Believe All Women slogan. He argues it completely destroys the fundamental legal concept of due process. To illustrate this, he brings up the Duke lacrosse case.
Right, from back in 2006, where the players were accused of assault, the media absolutely crucified them, the prosecutor hid exculpatory evidence, and it turned out the accuser made the whole thing up.
Exactly. And he also mentions the mattress girl case at Columbia University. In both of these instances, men's reputations and lives were torched by the media and the institutions based on claims that turned out to be entirely false.
But the damage was already done.
Right. Riker argues that in a gynocentric society, the accusation itself is the verdict. There is no waiting for evidence.
He says these false accusations are a primary weapon in custody battles, too.
Yes, he refers to it as the silver bullet strategy. Accuse the father of abuse to gain immediate, overwhelming leverage in court. You get a restraining order, and you cut him off from the kids before a judge even looks at the facts of the case.
And Riker connects the despair caused by these systems directly to what he calls the body count.
He's talking about male suicide rates.
Yes, the high suicide rates among divorced men in particular.
He frames these as deaths of despair. His argument is that society demonizes masculinity at every turn, strips men of their children, takes their resources through the courts, and then acts surprised when the male suicide rate is so astronomically high.
It's an incredibly bleak picture he paints. Honestly, if you stop reading the book there, you'd probably feel pretty hopeless. And here's the major pivot of the book. Riker doesn't just complain about the state of things, he actually offers a cure. He lays out a concrete strategy for men to survive this environment.
He does. And it starts with a fundamental mindset shift. He calls for a total, unapologetic rejection of feminized compassion. He wants men to actively reclaim masculine virtue.
He's big on using philosophy as armor. He talks extensively about the trivium.
Yeah.
What is that for our listeners who might not be familiar?
A trivium is the classical method of learning. It consists of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Riker argues that men need to deliberately retrain their brains to process reality through cold logic, not emotion.
And he combines this with Stoicism, right? Specifically the writings of Marcus Aurelius.
Yes, the whole idea is to build what the Stoics call an inner citadel.
So mental fortification against the culture.
Exactly. If the world is constantly trying to manipulate you emotionally, using that reputation carpet bombing or guilt tripping you, you use logic and stoicism to remain completely unaffected. You don't let them trigger you. You become an emotional rock.
Then there's the physical and social side of his cure. He outlines something called the Phoenix Protocol.
This is the idea of rising from the ashes of a failed society. It involves rigorous physical fitness, lifting heavy weights, combat training, getting physically dangerous but highly disciplined. But it also involves building what he calls iron councils.
Iron councils. That sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, but he means something very practical by it.
He does. He's talking about building actual male brotherhoods.
Yeah.
Not just drinking buddies you watch the game with, but fraternities in the truest, oldest sense of the word.
Small groups of men who hold each other accountable.
Right. Groups that reject the victim mindset and actively support each other outside of the gynocentric system. It's about relying on other men for validation, strength, and support, rather than constantly seeking it from women or mainstream society.
And then there's the financial strategy. This is where he talks about economic insurgency. I found this part really detailed and fascinating.
This is the core of the opting out strategy. Riker advises men to starve the beast.
How does he justify that?
His argument is simple. If the state uses your taxes to fund institutions that actively hate you, and the courts use your own assets to pay for your destruction in a divorce, then logically you should minimize your financial exposure to both.
So, practically speaking, how does one actually do that, according to the book?
He discusses utilizing cryptocurrency heavily. Things like Bitcoin or Monero privacy coins that are much harder for the state to arbitrarily seize or track.
He also talks about setting up offshore trusts, right? He specifically mentions the Cook Islands.
Yes, the Cook Islands are mentioned as a premier haven for asset protection. The ultimate goal here is to make yourself legally and financially judgment-proof.
This connects directly to the MGTRW movement, doesn't it? Men going their own way.
Exactly. It's the exact same ethos. The premise is that if the legal contract of marriage is entirely rigged against you from day one, the only winning move is simply not to sign it.
Don't participate in the gynocentric economy at all.
Right. Don't cohabitate, don't marry, don't put yourself in any legal position where the state can step in and adjudicate your personal life and take your resources.
He also mentions building parallel societies as the ultimate end goal.
Yes. This is the final step of the Phoenix Protocol. If the public schools are indoctrinating kids with woke ideology, you pull them out and homeschool.
If the corporations are hiring based on diversity quotas rather than actual merit, you build your own networks.
Exactly. You create businesses that rely strictly on competence and excellence. It's a call to build a completely separate ecosystem that operates on reality, biology, and logic rather than feelings and political correctness.
It's a radical manual for survival. There's no other way to describe it.
It truly is. Riker frames the entire book as a massive red pill for a collapsing civilization. He's arguing that these mainstream institutions are way too far gone to be saved from the inside. They've been totally captured by feminists and Marxists, and history consistently shows that when a society rejects basic biological reality, like the fundamental differences between men and women, it eventually crumbles.
He wants men to be ready and capable for what comes after the collapse.
Precisely.
It raises a really provocative thought for everyone listening right now. If the institutions are fundamentally rigged against you, if the courts, the HR departments, the media are all operating on a script that inherently paints you as either the villain or just a disposable ATM, is the only winning move to stop playing their game entirely and build your own.
That is the central, burning question Riker leaves you with. And for the countless men out there feeling squeezed and betrayed by this system, the answer he provides is going to look like a much-needed lifeline.
Absolutely. Look, we have covered a ton of ground today, but honestly, this deep dive was just a preview. The actual content in this book is ultra long, incredibly incisive, and deeply fascinating. We're talking about a dense arsenal of arguments, pages of data tables regarding the wage gap, and a deep historical analysis of institutional capture that we just couldn't fit into one show.
If you want the full picture, the specific step-by-step breakdown of the Phoenix Protocol, the legal citations, the full history of this cultural shift, you really need to read the source material for yourself.
You do. So open up your browser, go check out Leftist Insanity, Purity Spirals, Narcissism of Small Differences, and Rejection of Reality by Conrad Riker. It's available right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. If you want to truly understand the history of our institutions before they were captured, buy it immediately.
And for his ongoing real-time analysis on these topics,
Yeah.
Riker is very active on Substack. You can follow him at Conrad Riker.
Do not miss out on that. It's a controversial, completely unapologetic read that will absolutely challenge how you see the world. Thanks for being with us on this deep dive. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the show for more unfiltered insights like this. We will see you next time.